India's East.
Our next speaker is a very prominent face from India's East. From Odisha, we had very few guests from Odisha at this conclave, and he is also in charge of his party from my home state, Assam. Please welcome on stage Baijayant Jay Panda, senior BJP leader, national vice president, and holding several important positions, as we'll know soon. You have just got a very important assignment. I believe 76,000 booths will be under your control. You will have to figure out how BJP wins 2024 Lok Sabha elections. What is the plan, sir?
Well, in the BJP, there are always assignments of different size and scale. And there is not a week that goes by when BJP Karyakartas are not involved in some assignment on the ground. So we are always working. And in terms of our preparation, we don't just turn up at elections. We are there 24/7, round the year. I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, during the corona crisis, lakhs of BJP workers across the country, in every state, every district, reached out and helped people in distress, organizing community kitchens, distributing masks, helping with oxygen, getting people admitted into hospitals. And similarly, when it comes to elections, we prepare a lot ahead of time. So internal works, I'm not going to go into the details of how we do all that, but we do reach out to people, both for just social work, to aid them, and also for our own political preparation.
I would actually like to know, because this booth management and booth preparations for BJP, it's always discussed in political circles and among journalists also, because many experts say that the BJP's success across the country lies in this simple fact that they manage the booths very well. So how do you start your day? In the morning, do you start getting calls from the booths, or you start talking to the booth managers, or you get a call from the Union Home Minister or the BJP President? How do you manage these things? Because I find it very interesting that you would manage 76,000 booths, one person, so you would have a team. How are you planning to do it? The structure I would like to understand.
Look, I'm not going to talk about this specific program because it's not a public program. This is an organizational program, and I'm not going to go into that. But suffice it to say that nothing in the BJP is a one-person effort. There are people involved at, many people at the national level, many people at each state level, many people at each district level, and our organization is very strong on the ground. Below the district, there are 3 levels. So we have something called a mandal, we have something called a Shakti Kendra, and below that comes the booth. So we have an organization, the BJP has 180 million members, 18 crores. It's the largest party in the world. We superseded the Chinese Communist Party almost a decade ago and have kept on growing. And that's because, and it's not an overnight success either. There have been 3 or 4 generations of party members and leaders who've sacrificed, toiled for this. And then we've, of course, had great inspirational leaders like Atal Bihari Vajpayee and now Narendra Modi. And that's just one aspect of it. The organizational strength is because of a core belief in the nation. We internally discuss all the time that we are the only party that believes in nation first, party second, and self last. This is a mantra that is repeated throughout internal discussions at every level. And I think that's what makes us unique.
Also, this fact why I'm insisting on the understanding how you plan your elections, because in West Bengal and in Odisha, two states in East, you haven't been successful. You still couldn't form the government, whereas you could penetrate, and now you have governments in almost every state in the Northeast. What is the difference? I know other states in Northeast, 7 other states are different, but Assam, West Bengal and Odisha, if you compare these 3 states, how are Odisha and West Bengal different for BJP from Assam?
See, I want to put this in the context of what I said a little bit earlier, that our success is not an overnight success. 3 or 4 generations of people put in effort over decades, and suddenly success seems to happen very quickly. So since you mentioned Assam, your home state, until 6 years ago, people used to write us off and say the BJP could never win Assam because of the demographics, because of many other reasons. We won Assam for the first time in 2016, and we had a government under Sarbanand Sonowal. We won it again in 2021, and now we have a government under Himanta Biswa Sharma. Now, you could say that you just said that we haven't succeeded in Odisha and West Bengal. I see it differently. Because both in Odisha and West Bengal, until just the previous cycle of elections, we were considered as non-contenders. In Odisha, we were a very distant number 3. But in the course of these last 2 election cycles, particularly the last one, we have become the clear number 2 in both states. And that puts us in a launchpad position. You know, in the 2019 election for the Lok Sabha, there were hardly 4 percentage points differentiating BJP and the regional party which is in government in Odisha. And similarly, in Bengal, the gains that we have had have been phenomenal. I mean, to go from 3 seats to 77 seats is it's phenomenal. So we see it very differently. We don't think that this is not worth celebrating. We think that this sets the stage for us to come to government the next time for sure.
But so the counter argument is, you mentioned Assam, that you had 2 governments, but before Sarbanand Sonowal ji took charge, before that election, the BJP had, if I remember correctly, only 5 seats, and from 5 to 60 for 2 consecutive terms. It was also a huge jump, and they could form the government. That didn't happen in Odisha and West Bengal. It is almost similar situation.
Look, I think the circumstances are different. In some senses, these eastern states have a lot in common. They have been neglected by earlier national governments. They have a similar bonding in terms of culture, in terms of language. There's enormous potential that needs to be tapped. But in some senses, they're also a little different. The demographics of Assam and Bengal are quite different from the demographics in Odisha. Yes, we've had quite spectacular spurts in some states. In Tripura, for instance, we went from having very low presence to being built up dramatically. But each state has its own dynamics. So in some states, we will gain with each successive election cycle, as we have shown in both Bengal and in Odisha. In the last 2 election cycles, we have just kept on getting bigger and more successful. And we are just a stone's throw away from displacing the number 1 parties in these states. And in some other states, because of various other local considerations, the dynamics changed in a very rapid manner. But I don't think ultimately that makes a difference as long as you're growing.
Or is it because that both states, West Bengal and Odisha, they had very strong regional leaders to counter BJP, and these are the places where the Prime Minister Modi's magic didn't work?
No, that's not true at all. If the Modi magic didn't work, if the BJP wasn't getting traction with the people, we wouldn't have been growing. You know, like I said, it's a spectacular growth for the BJP in Odisha to go from 1 Lok Sabha seat to 8 Lok Sabha seats. And in Bengal, the numbers speak for themselves. So, as I said, success can happen in 2 or 3 cycles of elections, or it can come together and happen suddenly. The reality is, Prime Minister Modi has put a greater focus on the East and the Northeast than any of his predecessors. He's visited the Northeast more times than the cumulative number of visits of all former prime ministers. And that has led to a dramatic turnaround in terms of development. You know, Tripura is just getting its first railway line. Manipur is just getting its first railway line in the Modi government. For decades before this, it was neglected. If you look at the infrastructure projects, if you look at the other projects which are, of course, throughout the country, such as piped drinking water in every home, there's been enormous developmental work. So, there is absolutely every reason to believe that the people of the Northeast and the East are increasingly committed to the idea that the BJP alone can give them good governance.
But this expansion is also making several other parties and communities very uncomfortable. Just a while ago, Conrad Sangma, Meghalaya CM, he said that minorities, especially, he was talking on behalf of the Christians, they are feeling cornered, they are feeling threatened because of, he didn't mention BJP, but he said because of the power, certain fringe elements are making lives of minorities uncomfortable, and he is your ally. How do you react to that?
First of all, the BJP has been misrepresented by certain sections in media and obviously some of our opponents. And I want to make something very clear. Our governance philosophy is enshrined in the slogan, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas. And I dare anybody to look at BJP's governance wherever we are in government. There are hundreds of government schemes. I talked about piped water in every home, the Ujjwala gas scheme. There are literally dozens of schemes. I dare anyone to show an example where there has been discrimination against any citizen, whether on ground of religion or caste or any other ground at all. There isn't. Now, it's very interesting that in the Northeast, the demographics are quite different from most parts of India. And yet the BJP has been gaining ground. So recently in Assam, of course we've won Assam twice the state, but you've had local elections. You've had municipal corporation elections. You've had urban elections in Guwahati. And for the first time, we are now beginning to win seats in areas that were traditionally claimed by our opponents that these are unwinnable by BJP because of the demographics of the citizenry in those areas, whether Christian, Muslim. In Mizoram recently, the demographics are very different from the rest of India, and we have started winning in local elections. But you have a point about some parties getting very uncomfortable. And because most parties in India are dynastic parties, whether it's the party here in West Bengal, whether it's the parties that were recently displaced in Maharashtra, most parties in the country are dynastic. And they're getting increasingly nervous because the people of India, the aspirational youth population of India especially, is now looking to go beyond dynasties. You've seen the voting pattern changes in Uttar Pradesh, where the elections had been dominated almost entirely on issues of caste, on issues of groups that divided from each other. That's been changing because our mantra of focusing on development and the belief that Prime Minister Modi and BJP can deliver that, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Vikas, without discrimination, is beginning to be increasingly accepted. So it's quite natural for many of these parties to feel very nervous.
As you were saying, you're arguing actually the BJP's success and spread is all because of the developmental works and benefiting the target groups. If that's so, then why BJP has to practice divisive politics? Because after the BJP government came in, we see a lot of Hindu versus Muslim battles or issues related to goddess, or even statements on Twitter or on social media, people are getting arrested because of that. There is a kind of communal tension in the country. We are looking for temples in every mosque. Why do you need to do all that if your focus is only on developmental work and people are voting back BJP to power because of that only? Why do you need this kind of environment?
No, the BJP doesn't practice divisive politics, but there are certain sections that want to promote that idea, and let me address that. The reality is, as I have repeated, the BJP does focus on developmental policies, and you've seen the massive number of policy changes that have taken place in the last 8 years, whether it is GST, whether it is economic reforms, so many examples, the massive investment in infrastructure, and there is absolutely no discrimination whatsoever. Nobody disputes that, neither do you. Now, this allegation that there is divisive politics is not true. We are very clear that we are bound by the constitution. I urge people to read the BJP's own constitution. The BJP's own constitution is committed to the idea that every citizen of India is equal. Now, if there are people that have strayed from that idea, the BJP takes action on them. I don't want to go into specifics, but there are many examples where the BJP has taken disciplinary action where people stray from that.
Are you referring to the Nupur Sharma incident?
It doesn't matter who the individual is. The BJP does not condone the idea that you, make things personal or attack any religion or any caste or any group. The BJP doesn't believe in that. Now, the reality is, there are certain unfinished business in the constitution that the BJP is committed to doing. Article 370 was the only temporary article in the constitution. The BJP was committed to removing it. All the opposition parties were committed to removing it, but they fell prey to appeasement politics and didn't do it. We did it. Our philosophy is justice to all, appeasement of none. Now, similarly, the so-called secular parties in India, now you in the media have a responsibility to question them, because the secularism as defined in India would not pass muster anywhere in the world. It was introduced by the colonial rulers, where only the places of worship of the majority population are controlled by government. That's not secularism. Places of worship of other religions are managed by their own communities, which is the way it should be. Now, if you start with the fundamental definition of secularism being wrong, you try and use this description that the places of worship of the majority population will be controlled by government. You try saying that to Americans or Germans or Japanese or UK and say this is secularism. They will laugh in your face. So these issues are being challenged. Now, look, there is a history. It is a fact that many temples were in fact destroyed. But the idea is not to rake up old wounds. The idea is that the Ram Mandir issue has been resolved, which was the biggest of those issues. It's not just the BJP, it's even cultural leaders like Mohan Bhagwatji of the RSS has made a comment that one shouldn't be looking for shivlings in every temple. That's not the intention. Our intention is that we must go by the constitution. We must abide by equal rights to every citizen. And that was not being done. There was appeasement politics, which the BJP is correcting. And those who had fallen into the pattern of this fake secularism and appeasement politics are obviously trying to strike back.
In correcting that, you are going to the other extreme. Now, there is an environment of getting hurt by every statement or every comment, and freedom of expression, as many say, is under serious challenge. Now, the current controversy is a filmmaker depicting goddess Kali smoking cigarette. How do you react to that? Means many are demanding that, as you represent BJP, I want to know the party's view on this aspect. That many are saying that, oh, this is hurting Hindu sentiments and the filmmaker should be arrested. The other side is saying it's her freedom of expression. Where do you stand on this issue?
Look, you in the media can't have it both ways. You can't say that the left liberal jihadi ecosystem can have freedom of expression. They can say whatever they wish. Wait, let me complete. You may not have said it, but the implication of what you are asking means...
It's a very simple question.
I'm answering it, if you let me. The point is this. There are people who are going around killing people. You see what happened in Udaipur. Okay? You had a beheading because somebody was provoked by a statement. How many of you have spoken up for freedom of speech in that case?
But
now,
sir, the Supreme Court has said the provocation came from one of your former members.
But if you let me, you must let me answer your question. If you want to have a narrative for your viewers, that's different. But I urge that your viewers, if they want to hear from me, they should hear from me. Now, My point is this. Freedom of speech is a guaranteed right in the Indian Constitution with certain circumscriptions on it. And that's what must be followed. It is wrong to say that people have been arrested for positions they take on freedom of speech. You are alluding to a recent arrest when it's very clear that people are violating FCRA norms. People have been violating Foreign Contribution Act norms, misusing it for propaganda, trying to pass themselves off as news sites. I mean, you wouldn't do it as a news platform yourself. Why should you tolerate other people doing it?
I was referring to this filmmaker who showed Goddess Kali as smoking cigarette, and there is a demand. She hasn't been arrested. There is a demand that she should be arrested. Do you think that she should be arrested, or she should have the freedom of expression to depict or showcase her interpretation of the goddess?
I think that's a very good question. I think we are having a national debate on this issue because, on the one hand, the Supreme Court, as you rightly said, has criticized somebody for criticizing a religion, right? Or quoting text from a religion itself, which some perceive to be criticism. Now, I wonder if the Supreme Court will take the exact same stand in the case of this filmmaker. Now, this is a live debate. My point is, we can't have different standards. If you say that one set of people saying something critical about another set of people hurts the entire country, then the same law should apply to the other side also. If another set of people say the same thing about you, it should apply to them. So this is a live debate. The reality is, in the Indian Constitution, under the first Prime Minister, changes were made which put some of these restrictions in place. Otherwise, we had, in the beginning, we had a complete, what Ambedkar had drafted was complete freedom of speech. And here you must distinguish between speech and action. That's the gold standard of freedom of speech. You say something, it should be permitted, but you go and behead somebody as a provocation, that's not permitted. So this is a debate we are having in the country. My own view, which you asked for, is whatever standard we evolve must equally apply to all.
On that note, we'll have to conclude this session because time is running out. Mr. Panda, thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful having this conversation. I could have continued it because I wanted a far more direct answer. Nonetheless, thank you. Much appreciate you joining here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Panda. Our next session